What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Paperback Punk. Now, I feel like the rest of the world is opening up, so even though coronavirus is probably still at its worst, a lot of people are not doing the quarantine anymore, and I feel like in order to keep up with that, I decided to do my quarantine wrap-up since my state and city have decided that social distancing is the only priority and you don't have to quarantine anymore. So I'm still doing my best and still doing my part, but I feel like this is the right place to stop and end the quarantine and tell you guys what I read during this quarantine. Now, if you guys are new to this channel, maybe you didn't see my first video, I guess my only video, I just recently got into reading and it's been during this quarantine, so I've spent a lot of time reading books and falling in love with reading, which has been super cool. So I have read about 20 books, 21 books so far. So the couple of the books that are in here, I'm not gonna talk too much about, mainly Harry Potter and the Hunger Games trilogy, including the new book, because I want to actually do videos on those books in particular. This is going to be more of a list. I'll let you guys know if I recommend any of these books, which I do recommend a lot of them. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into this. To save some time for you guys, so this video is not too long, I'm not going to grab each book and show you. I'll just use the magic of editing to put some, you know, little art here so you know what book I'm talking about. But yeah, so I'm going to go through my Goodreads and let you guys know what I've been tracking and what I read. I don't know if these are 100% in order. It already looks like they're probably not. But the first book I read was the Memoir from the girls that Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered. Now, I am a huge fan of this podcast. I feel like all the road trips I've taken, no music, only listening to this podcast, and I love it so much. I obviously love listening to true crime stuff or reading about true crime, thriller, things like that. So, you know, for them to write a memoir to get to know them a little bit better is so much fun because I feel like I've spent so many hours of my life with them, again, with various road trips and stuff, that I thought it would be really great to read this book. And it turns out it was the perfect read. It's really cool, again, to get to see the inside of their lives and some of the stuff they've gone through and how they kind of linked up and created this podcast that a lot of people have grown to love. And yeah, it was really cool. So I highly recommend if you're a fan. I feel like it's a good read anyways, but I feel like if you don't listen to the podcast, you don't understand a lot of their humor or kind of where they're coming from, you might not connect as much with it, but it's still a great story overall. So I do recommend this one. Now, the next book that I read is actually the first book that I read, and it is by Dan Chaon. The book is called Ill Will. And it's very interesting. It's one of those stories where we're talking about a guy in current day and his trauma that he went through when he was a child. He's having trouble remembering what really happened there, and it's taken up to this point for him to really uncover some of the mysteries that happened. So while he's dealing with that in his adult life, there is also this very just terrible thing happening to him, and I feel like he's trying to investigate several different things. A lot of it is based on loosely based, I should say, on some of the murders that happened here in Wisconsin. Young men in a college town keep ending up being found dead in a river, drowned. And so the book is like loosely based on that. And so there is like this moment where he's like trying to investigate that, but there's so much bad stuff happening from his childhood. And there's this book, I swear, it tells you this story from multiple different characters at the same time, and you get this like very unnerving feeling as you're going page by page. I read this in 2 days. I couldn't put it down. It was the first book that I've read. I saw some of you, Dwayne for sure, have actually read this book since I recommended it in my first video, and I'm really stoked that you liked it. I don't think this one's for everybody. It's definitely got some interesting twists to it. It's definitely got some interesting writing styles in it, but overall I think it's a great read, especially if you love those like darker books with a little bit of suspense, because it's all there. The next two books I actually read on my Amazon Oasis Kindle. I had just bought it, and so I was really excited to download books and read them. And so I got these two because they were like the #1 on Amazon Unlimited, and I was like, oh cool, a thriller and it's free to read, so let's enjoy it. Don't do it. So it was Sara's Game and Sara's Past. There's another book, but I couldn't bring myself to read it. These are by Ernie, Lindsey. And when I first read them, I think I had a better review of them because I didn't know as much about reading. I was still getting into these genres and stuff. But as I go back and I think about this book, I feel like it wanted to be serious, but not a single line in the book ever felt serious. This book always felt like it was written as a comic book, but it was supposed to be serious. This girl, Sarah Winthrop, her husband went missing, and you know, a couple of years back, her kids get kidnapped. I mean, this is the plot for a very like disturbing book. However, it felt comical. The characters were super unlikable. They were very unrealistic. And as much as I love Sara being a badass in this, because that's absolutely what she does, it was just like too unrealistic. I feel like when I'm with this genre, I want it to be at least somewhat, I don't know, serious. And I feel like there was like zero seriousness. And so for whatever reason, I picked up book 2, which book 2 was Sara's Past. And this one was so much worse. I actually like struggled to get through it. There's like some ridiculous comical action scenes in this book, and I do not recommend it. So I did not go to book 3, and I don't waste your time. They're very easy reads, but it's just not worth it. I'm surprised that they're number 1. I know that's really harsh, but I'm just saying, like, don't do it. So the next book on this list was actually my introduction to Stephen King's writing, and this is definitely one of my favorite books on this list, and that's The Shining. Now, if you've seen the movie and you haven't read the book, I highly suggest you go and read the book because it is so different from the movie. The movie actually just picked little things to influence the movie from the book, and it's so much different. So I definitely recommend you picking it up and reading it. Stephen King does this amazing job of writing this story, and it just unfolds of this man losing his mind and him combating with it. Like, it's very interesting to hear some of the dialogue with himself trying to fight off the evil that is trying to take him over. And it's honestly incredible. I could not put the book down. I'm pretty sure that I read this within like 2 to 3 days because I just wanted to keep going. And I'm really glad I did. Again, this was my introduction to Stephen King, but there's just something so beautiful about the writing style that I'm hooked. I mean, I bought a bunch of his stuff. I'm like just trying to go through the list now. So the next 4 books that I read were actually my introduction to the Harry Potter series. Now, I had read book 1 when I was younger. I didn't really remember it much. I had seen that movie like when it first came out. I think I was in like, I don't know what grade I was in, but I saw it right away. And I didn't remember much from the movie, so it was really nice to go into the book that way. It was a little bit difficult for me to dive in because we're talking about Harry Potter is 11 years old. I'm almost 30 and I'm reading this. The one thing I do love, though, is that Harry Potter, who wrote his own autobiography, because I know it says J.K. Rowling on the book, but we don't know her. I'm not sure who that is. But him being able to write himself, it almost felt like he was much older than 11 years old. And I think that's what was able to grasp me onto this quickly. Plus, I love the fact that there is this mystery and suspense that is throughout all of these novels, because at the end, there's always a twist. Something you kind of expected, but you had no idea. And I love that I got that out of these books. So book 1, just awesome. It's just awesome to dive into a story that's so big on that first book. I felt that way going into the second as well. I feel like it was a little bit slower. I think one thing is when you're reading them one after another, they reintroduce a lot of things that are happening for people that may have picked up on that book. And I had to get past that. Book 3 was incredible. I loved book 3 so much. Then I got into Goblet of Fire, and Goblet of Fire was good, but it was obviously a much bigger read than the other ones had been. And I was a little like hesitant getting into it. I was thinking like, oh no, we're gonna get into these games and this is gonna last so long in this. But I actually really enjoyed when it happened, and I couldn't put it down. Obviously the end, I'm sure there's spoilers. I'm sure people know what happened, but I'm just gonna say the end of that book was insane. I was not expecting it, and getting to see these moments where it's Harry versus Voldemort, I feel like there's just something so powerful there, and it's really cool to see that in the writing style as well. So once I got to book 4, I actually took a break. I was like, okay, I don't want to just finish all of these right away. So then I read Await Your Reply from Dan Chaon. So Await Your Reply is really cool because without trying to spoil anything, it's basically just how somebody can affect your life so much. And this is based on 3 different people who have that happen to them. And it's really hard for me to say anything without giving it away, just because I feel like it kind of spoils itself, not with who the character is, but just as the story starts to unfold. But it's based heavily on our online presences, on our bank accounts that are available online, our DMV records, our housing records, all kinds of stuff, and what some people can do with that information. And so it is definitely worth reading. I'm not gonna lie, at first, as I was reading it, it was very scattered. It was very hard to follow, and I wasn't sure if I was going to keep up with it, but I got about 3 chapters in, and I was hooked. There were a couple things that were happening in the plot, and I was instantly hooked, and I kept that way all the way through. I finished it so fast, And that's usually how I tell if a book's really good, is how many times do I need to come back to it to finish it. So the next book on this list is The Whisper Man by Alex North. Now, I really enjoyed this book because it is a serial killer book with that like mystery, suspense, thriller side to it, which I always enjoy. Plus, it's got some really good detective characters in this book. And it's basically about this family who moves to a town where 10 years prior, there was a guy who was preying on children, and he would do this whisper thing in their window to try to comfort them with his voice, and then end up kidnapping them and murdering them. And so then 10 years go by, and this family moves back to this town, and it starts happening again. And the story basically just unfolds of how it's happening to this particular family. The only thing I didn't love about it is there are chapters that are narrated by the kid himself, which is, I only think he's like 6 or 7. And it's just kind of interesting. Like, that's the only part of this book that I didn't like. It's my biggest critique, because the overall story and like the father and one of the main detectives, everything else is really cool about this book. So I do recommend checking it out, but please keep in mind that there are a couple chapters narrated by the kid that I feel like just don't work very well. So after I read those and I took my break, I jumped back into Harry Potter, and I'm not gonna lie, I struggled with this book a lot. So it was book 5, Order of the Phoenix. And right away, there were, one of my biggest things was, I understand that Harry was going through a lot after what happened in Goblet of Fire. He was dealing with a lot of trauma, a lot of depression, things that he wouldn't have even known because he's so young. But I'm not gonna lie, 30% into the book, I was struggling. It was taking everything in me to even read a chapter a day because I wasn't enjoying it. And I think it just had a lot to do with Harry treating everyone around him so poorly. And I know that seems mean when you think about what he went through, but it was just hard to read it because he felt whiny. And I've always felt as he was this very like strong boy considering what he was going through, but I just feel like it was a little bit rough. However, I posted on Twitter that I was struggling with it. You guys said to keep up with it, and you weren't wrong. The only other critique that I had with it is there were way too many characters with the Order of the Phoenix, so it's hard to keep up with that many characters sometimes. Trying to put faces and imagine all these different characters, especially if you haven't seen the movies, which I haven't other than the first one. But I will say that as this book continued to progress, it got so much better. And that final scene with Voldemort and Dumbledore and Harry, I love it so much. I felt like I was just reading this book and I was like, yes. Like, I was so excited. So I think it was just one of those redeeming moments of finishing the book and getting through some of those chapters that I was struggling with. But I was just really glad to see Harry kind of break out of his shell once he got to the end. And I actually had the next 2 books to read, but I haven't read them yet because I do want to catch up on all these other books that I have, and I want to finish the series and actually make a complete video on my thoughts of it, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Okay, so the next 3 books I highly recommend. I have become a Gillian Flynn stan. I think that I haven't read a ton of books, of novels, so my pick isn't very, like, my reach isn't very wide, but I love Gillian Flynn. So the first thing I read was Dark Places. Now, I read Dark Places because the comment said that it was a very dark and twisted book, and I was expecting it to be a little bit more, like, gory and graphic, considering some of the reviews. So it was a little bit more tame. However, for like the average reader, yeah, this thing is dark and twisted. And a lot of it came down to, I picked it because it was talking about a satanic ritual that murdered a family. And I was like, oh shit, let's fucking go. And I'm not going to spoil anything for you guys, but there is so much more to it than just a satanic group that murdered a family. And I don't want to ruin it for you. So please, if you've never read Dark Places, go check it out. Also, that's my dog barking. She's probably upset that I'm in here. But yes, go read Dark Places. I highly suggest it. Because right after I read Dark Places, literally as soon as I finished it, I bought Sharp Objects. Sharp Objects, again, another badass book from Gillian Flynn, featuring a very strong female character. Now, this book was based more on a writer in Chicago is sent somewhere in the Midwest to go back to her hometown because there is a string of murders that have happened. And the twists in this book were insane. I feel like every time a new character was introduced, something dark about this character was brought on. And the more and more that I read this, I couldn't put it down. I don't know how else to say it. I literally couldn't put this book down. So if you've ever read Gillian Flynn's work, and and you've never read this one, she only has a handful of books. I can't recommend this book enough. This is actually my favorite of all of her books. So please go check it out. I don't want to spoil any of these books for you. It's very hard with the suspense and the thriller books because the littlest detail could give away such a big thing in a story. And I'm someone who, like, if I know a spoiler of a book, chances are I'm not going to read it. So I don't want to ruin it for you, but take it at my word. You're going to love the main character so much. And some of the stuff she goes through, her mother, fuck. That's all I gotta say. Okay, so the next book that I read from Gillian Flynn was Gone Girl. And I gotta say right away, this was my least favorite of the 3 that I read from her. I think a lot of it had to do to the characters. One thing about Sharp Objects and Dark Places is that the characters are just so well written. You're like rooting for them in so many different points. And I feel like with Gone Girl, this couple should have never been together. Like from the first couple chapters, I hated their marriage. And I feel like what happens after is batshit crazy enough, but the ending, while I will say that the payoff was great, I'm glad that I finished it because I love the ending. I also hate the ending so much because if you've never read it, I don't want to ruin it for you, but let's just say that it's so fucked up. Like, it's so fucked up. And I think for that reason, you should definitely read through this, but I will say that you're probably gonna have trouble with the characters. You just read every time and you're like, God, I hate you. Every page, I was like, I hate you guys so much. But yeah, definitely check it out. Okay, so the next book that I read was The Couple Next Door. Now, this book is about a couple who live next to another couple, and they're over at a dinner party one night and their baby goes missing. Even though they're checking on their baby every 30 minutes, someone steals the baby. The rest of this book, we continue to unwrap what really happened to this child. And as soon as you think, I think halfway through, they think they figure this thing out. And oh my God, this book just explodes even further. So I highly recommend it. It's a very short read. I think I read it in like a day and a half. I've already let people borrow this book because I feel like it's such an easy read, but it can grasp you into that suspense and mystery genre. And plus, like, some of the characters in this book are so messed up, and I love that the author was able to really write those characters. So you're reading it, and even though they're messed up, you're still like, man, I hope this works out, if you know what I mean. So definitely recommend this one. I would not skip it. Okay, so as I'm going down this list, I realized that I love reading female authors. So the next book on this list is All the Missing Girls by Miranda. Now, this is the first book I've ever read from her, and since then I've purchased another 2 books that she's written, but I haven't read them yet. And what I like about this book is something that I was nervous about. So this book is actually written backwards. So as someone who likes suspense and that thriller part, and I want these big twists, I was really nervous whenever I thought that I found out what happened right in the first 2 chapters. And I was almost kind of like, okay, well, we just read, 25 pages, and now there's like another how many of chapters, but I already know what happened. Could not be further from the truth. So it's about this woman who is going back because her dad has Alzheimer's and dementia and is going to a home. So they're going to go back, her and her brother, and sell their property, sell the house, and use that money to pay for, I think, his medical bills or something. And it's one of those things where they've got some close-knit friends, some close new family members, and this whole small town is hiding this secret of what happened to the main character when she was in high school. And it happens again. Like, as soon as she shows up, suddenly this horrible event happens again. And yeah, we're going backwards. So we kind of hear what happens, and then every page or every chapter is 1 day prior. So you're reading like the 2 weeks backwards. The twist at the end is worth it. I know I saw some of the reviews on Goodreads after I finished it. People talking about how they felt about it, if they liked it, if they didn't. A lot of people were very critical about a book that was told backwards, but it really tells you the start. It does this like 2 week backwards thing, and then it puts you in like a current situation at the present. So I definitely recommend checking this out. I liked it enough that I went and bought her other 2 books. So I'm definitely recommending it because I feel like you guys will like it. On these books, I'm not going to go too far into this because I am going to be covering them in their own video because I feel like these books were so big. There were so many things that were going on. And that would be the Hunger Games trilogy, including the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So I picked up the Hunger Games. I actually got the like 3-part, I got this thing. It's like 3 parts and comes with a journal. I'll never use the journal. I picked it up for like 16 bucks and I was like, you know what? I'm going to read these. Everybody recommends these and you know, they come up on every list when I look at best books to read. And I was like, so I really can't go wrong with this. And from the first book, I was in. I actually read all 3 of them within like the week. I just like every time I finished one, I started the next one because I wanted to hear more and more of the story. Katniss is such a likable character. She's dealing with so many different things in this trilogy, and it's very interesting to see just how like heroic she is, even though she's scared a lot of the time. I feel like she's willing to put everything on the line, and you get to find that out within the first chapter when she's at the reaping and she steps up for her sister. And I feel like everything after that is just a showcase of just how awesome she is. The only thing I don't really love, and we'll get more and more into it, but this Katniss Gale, Katniss Peeta thing. I feel like she's in the worst love triangle because, I don't know, you've got Gale, who is basically exactly who she is, and then you have Peeta, who is everything she's not. And so part of you wants her to be with Gale because they would work out so well. The other part of you wants her to be with Peeta because they would work out so well for a different reason. Obviously, that's what ends up happening. But it was very interesting to read through that and her trying to deal with that. And, you know, I mean, this is told by her being 16 years old at first. So she's, you know, experiencing love for the first time and kind of how that goes. But everything else surrounding this book, I was scared. I thought that it might be like a children's book because I wasn't really sure. Dude, this book is so violent, so gory, which I'm always a huge fan of. I feel like there's also so many sad parts, like in book 1. Really? Rue? Are you serious? So like I said, I don't want to talk too much about my feelings on each book because I really do want to make a full video on it because there's so much. I will say that if you've read the original trilogy and you, for whatever reason, haven't picked up The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes yet, I recommend it so much. Actually, that ended up being my favorite book of all of them. And I think it's just because the storytelling was like, you're so hooked on Snow in that book. And it's very interesting how Suzanne Collins was able to like unwrap what ends up becoming in the future that we end up knowing from the trilogy. And I gotta say, man, if you haven't read it, it's definitely not what you're expecting. I think that I got a whole new appreciation for Snow, while at the same time I, you know, maintained a level of hate for him. I felt like there was just something about him that was very redeeming. And, you know, he's a very quirky dude. He is very weird. He's got a lot of problems going on around him. And it's just interesting. It's interesting to see what he does. Plus, I actually love the main character, female, that they end up putting with Snow. I think she's so cool. She's so interesting. And her alone is worth the read. There's one part in this book where it kind of takes a little bit of a slump. And I was a little bit nervous because the book was on such a high up until like 65%. And then I was kind of like, oh man, like, is this about to fall apart? Dude, after that little bit of slump, skyrocket. This book just kept getting better and better. The abrupt ending I wasn't a huge fan of, especially with how much time we put into Snow during this book. But then boom, there's an abrupt ending and I'm kind of like, and then there's like an epilogue which explains in 2.5 pages sort of where he's going. And I feel like we could have had a little bit better of a closure part, or a little bit better of an ending to give us a little bit more after all the time we just invested into Snow. But do not let that stop you from reading this book, because for those couple of little critiques I had of it, everything else was so spot on with it. And again, I had an appreciation for Snow this entire time. I didn't even know that was possible. So at this point, I'm completely sweaty because my room is so hot. But I know that's a lot of books at one time to throw at you guys, but I feel like it's important for me to give you at least that wrap up. There's a couple books in there that I really suggest you guys checking out, a couple books that you could definitely skip, but I also wanted to give you guys a chance to see sort of where I'm at with my reading journey and what I have read. Now, the next book the next video that I make is going to be a to be read list, which right now it just continues to grow because everywhere I go, I buy a new book. And I think that that's starting to become a bad habit because there's so many I need to read. But yeah, so I can't wait to share that video with you. And of course, I'll be doing my Hunger Games trilogy and Ballad of Songbirds video. And on top of all those things, I'll be doing a full Harry Potter collection video once I finish the other two. But thank you guys so much for stopping by today and checking out all the books I've read. Let me know in the comment section if you've read any of these and what your opinion was on them. I am very much looking forward to sharing more and more books with you guys and taking some of your feedback and your recommendations on books as well, because it's so overwhelming for a new reader to walk into a bookstore and try to find what the right thing to read is. And I've been trying to do my best to find things in the genres that I enjoy, but I am always open to something new because, you never know what that next book is going to hold for you. And for someone like me who doesn't know what they really love in books, I'm kind of always awaiting that. So thank you guys so much for checking out the Paperback Punk. Make sure you guys follow me on Instagram and Twitter. It is Paperback Punk X. And yeah, I'll be posting a lot of book stuff there. So I hope to see you guys in the next one. Peace.